Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is Summer of the Tiger Part 2, and it'll be presented by our fabulous expedition leader, Aditya Panda. So good to see you, Aditya. Thank you so much for joining us today and bringing us some more tigers.
Thank you, Sunny. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing great. I'm glad to be presenting the highlights of the last safari season, which just about is ending now in India. And before I start, I'd like to add to what Sunny said about putting in your questions in the Q&A section. In case you have any suggestions or requests for webinar topics from India, please do put those in too. I'd be delighted to present on topics that you would want me to present on. Now, coming back to today's webinar, to reintroduce myself, I'm Aditya Panda, and I have been leading Nat Hab's India expeditions since 2016. Those of you who were part of my last webinar hopefully enjoyed what I presented. I had presented on the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, which is one of our key tiger itineraries here in India. As most of you know, the trips in India started to resume in March this year after the 2-year gap from the pandemic. And while we've had a short season, because in India, the safari season ends by June, which is when the monsoon season begins. And it restarts again in November when winter begins. So right now, we had a short safari season from March through June. I think the last trip of the season must be running right now. And I had wanted to present the highlights of the trips I led this season. But, there were so many that I decided to divide them into 2 presentations. And the last time I presented on the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, which takes us to 3 national parks over a course of nearly 2 weeks. This time, I'm going to present on the India Tiger Quest expedition. So, welcome back to India. The India Tiger Quest expedition takes us to a fabulous national park called the Ranthambhore National Park and Tiger Reserve. It's often referred to as the Mecca of tiger photography. And our India Tiger Quest itinerary focuses on that. Not just tiger photography, we also have a Photo Pro version of this trip that is slightly longer. But this trip is designed to be able to show us the maximum amount of tigers possible in a week for which the trip runs. Now, how is that possible? Well, Ranthambhore is probably the most arid and very likely the hottest habitat that tigers occupy. Tigers, as you know, occupy a wide range of habitats from the Russian, far east, where temperatures go well below freezing every year, to the swamps of the mangrove swamps in the intertidal forests of the Sundarbans on the borders of India and Bangladesh, to the moist tropical deciduous forests of mainland India, the dry deciduous forests, rain forests, evergreen forests. The tiger is a very, very adaptable creature. But in Ranthambhore, where the Aravalli Mountains separate Ranthambhore Tiger Reserve from the Thar Desert, or the Great Indian Desert as it is called, to its west. The tiger occupies probably the driest habitat anywhere in this region. And that makes it, quite easy for us to spot them, especially in the peak of summer, which is when we choose to go there. And the vegetation is sparse compared to other parts of India and other areas that have tigers. And the shortage of water makes it much easier to find them, as tigers don't really take that well to heat, and they need to cool themselves down through the hottest part of the day. And they must find plenty of water to drink, and also plenty of shade next to water to rest in through the middle of the day. Wild Ranthambhore is a really dry and arid tiger habitat. Parts of the park have these beautiful lakes that retain water around the year, and these areas of the park become the hub of all wildlife activity in the summer months. The park also has these beautiful monuments. You see, if I go back to this slide, here you see in the backdrop there is a massive fort after which the park is named, and the pink building below it is a former hunting lodge of the Maharaja of Jaipur, under whose control Ranthambhore used to be before India was independent. And that lodge is now it's used as a forest rest house by the forest department that manages the park. And this here is another abandoned hunting lodge in which sometimes we get to see tigers, although we didn't get to see any in the lodge this season. Those of you who regularly watch my webinars might remember a picture of a tiger in this particular monument that I sometimes use in my webinars. So because the lakes area of Ranthambhore is so rich with wildlife, and it's such a hub for all the animals in the park, or in that part of the park, there has always been a resident tigress in that area, generation after generation. And the tigress that happens to rule this part of the park have, these tigresses for subsequent generations have always had this reputation of being able to raise cubs very, very successfully. And the reason behind that is that they've always had plenty of water, plenty of prey, and plenty of protection in which to raise these cubs. And every tigress that has occupied this area has been referred to as the Lady of the Lakes. Now, before the India Tiger Quest trips could begin in 2020, everything shut down. So while on the Grand India Wildlife Adventure and some of our other itineraries, it had been 2 years this year since we went back on those trips. For the India Tiger Quest trip, it had actually been 3 years since we went back. And a lot of things have changed in 3 years. There are new tigers, and for us to be going back and finding these tigers was quite interesting. So coming back to the Lady of the Lakes, when we had last visited Ranthambhore in 2019, the Lady of the Lakes at that time used to be a tigress called Arrowhead. I'll talk to you more about her later in this webinar. And I remember on my last trip to Ranthambhore in 2019, I had seen 2 cubs that Arrowhead had at that time. These were 2 young females, and they later were named Riddhi and Siddhi. And one of these cubs, Riddhi, is now a fully grown tigress, and she has managed to push her mother out of this territory and take over the lakes area, and she's now the new Lady of the Lakes. So I was quite excited to be able to see these young tigresses whom I had last seen as cubs. And one morning, when we were in zone 3, which is where the lakes are, we came across Riddhi resting by the tall grass on the banks of the lake. And we parked ourselves there and waited. She didn't look like she was, about to do much. She was lying down. She must have had a long night of hunting and patrolling, and she must have been tired after a long night out. And that morning, she must have come and had a drink in the lake and just fallen asleep by the grass. So we got a few beautiful pictures. The light was opposite, and we got this nice golden hue. And as we were watching Riddhi lying down in the grass there were alarm calls behind us and to our right. So since this tigress was not looking like she'd get up, we figured that we wouldn't lose anything, and we decided to go check those alarm calls out and then come back if there was nothing. But when we reached there, we found this very handsome male tiger. Now, this was another tiger that I had been rather keen to watch, because he's also what you call a new tiger in the area. When we last visited Ranthambhore, he was probably a cub. And this tiger is called Tiger 120. And I had heard about him. I had seen pictures of him on social media, posted by other people. Of course, he doesn't have a social media account. And I was very keen to see this young male tiger that had taken over some of the finest parts of the park. And he appeared out of the forest, and he walked down the rocks towards us. And if you look closely, this tiger has been in a fight. Around his toes, around his feet, you can see fresh blood. And he obviously has been getting into fights quite often, because you can see some scars on his nose as well. And as he walked, with a little bit of a limp, he was, still no less stunning and imposing looking. And obviously, he didn't seem to be in a good mood, but he was there and we were watching him, and he was followed shortly by this beautiful tigress called Arrowhead. Now that got us confused. You see, adult tigers of the same sex try and stay out of each other's territories. Tigresses might have adjoining territories, even if they're mother and daughter or sisters, but rarely will you ever find a tigress intruding so boldly into the territory of another tigress, while the other tigress is literally within hearing distance, because this mustn't have been more than maybe 500 yards or so from where we were watching Riddhi. So that got us very intrigued. The two tigers passed our jeeps really closely, and then the male T120 started walking towards where Riddhi was lying down. And he went and rested in the grass. And Arrowhead, interestingly, went and rested in the same lake. But there seemed to be this invisible line that was a really, really hard border. The spot where she got into the water was about, even though it was well within sight of where Riddhi was, it was about 100, 200 yards away. And Arrowhead never crossed that. She never followed T120, who just walked up to where Arrowhead was lying, and he went and lied down there and joined her. But Arrowhead, T120 walked up to where Riddhi was lying and went and joined her. But Arrowhead did not cross that invisible boundary which was somewhere in those 100 or 200 yards between them. And our attention shifted to the male and the female because they were lying there together. So we moved there, and Arrowhead just cooled off in the water, had a drink, and she just left the area and walked off. We were expecting that Riddhi and Arrowhead might actually get into a fight because that's happened before. And that's usually what happens when a tiger of the same sex intrudes into the territory of another tiger. So anyhow, that's Riddhi. She got up and came and joined T120. I don't have pictures of her actually walking up to the male because I was shooting a video then, which I'll show you towards the end of the presentation. But we had a fabulous morning watching the two tigers, just being with each other and lying down on the grass. And it was quite funny to see the tourists on the other side, absolutely being clueless as to where the tigers are and looking in the wrong direction while the tigers were putting up a show for us by the grass. And thanks to the fantastic drivers and guides we use in Ranthambhore and every other destination that we travel to, we always have fantastic positions, fantastic viewing angles whenever we are around these magnificent creatures. So that was that morning. That afternoon, we met T120's brother. Now, while T120 and his brother, both of them are young tigers and just about entering their prime, T120 has managed to establish his territory and find females to mate with. And I'll tell you why he was in a fight and who he was in a fight with later. But Tiger 120's brother, Tiger 121, hasn't managed to settle down yet. He hasn't managed to build his own territory yet. So he's mostly found wandering about, exploring new, potential territories, taking up fights with other tigers. And that afternoon, while we were on our way out of the park, we found him, and he came really, really close to our jeep. We backed up as the best we could to try and give him as much space as we could. But there was a big bus full of tourists behind us, and at one point he got really close. And that's not him growling at us or roaring at us. That's just him yawning. Fortunately, these tigers are quite comfortable around jeeps. They see them, right from their childhood. And, we had a lovely, really close sighting. And that allowed me to get some fantastic pictures. One thing I always try and do when I'm photographing wildlife is to try and get as low as possible, to be able to get at least to the eye level of the animal or lower, especially with big cats and large mammals. If you manage to get a lower angle, it really makes the animal look large and imposing and true to its character. There's another thing that I try to do, which is to try as close as possible without, of course, disturbing the animal or putting ourselves at risk, and as wide as possible on the lens. That tends to give some really nice perspectives and some really nice compositions compared to the typical, long zoom type portraits that everybody shoots. So 121 gave us some of those fantastic pictures. One familiar tiger that we met the next afternoon was Tiger 57. He is, probably 10 years old or so, beginning to get past his prime, but he's massive and he's a stunning looking, very bold, very confident tiger. But what was interesting to see was not so much T57, but his brother T58 that we met the morning after that. We had gone to an area called Zone 6 of the park, um, where that morning we were one of the first jeeps to enter. So for a long time, we did not have any other jeeps around us, and we literally had the zone to ourselves. And as we were checking out uh, waterhole, we heard an alarm call coming from the forest a little to our left. Sambar deer gave its typical alarm call that it does when it sees a predator. And as we watched, this tiger T58 came down and sat in the water, and we had him to ourselves. It was a brilliant sighting. And after he got into the water and had cooled off a bit, he got up and walked down towards the edge of the water at another spot. We were all thinking that he'll probably sit down and drink, because that's what he was looking like he was about to do. And we were getting ready to take some pictures of him drinking. And then he sort of stood there and looked into the water, for all the world admiring himself. But he did not drink. The very next moment, he leapt. He jumped across the water, giving us a fantastic sighting and some fantastic pictures, and jumped over to the other side. I don't know why he did that. He could have waded through. He was already wet. And that jump did not really keep him any drier. He still landed with his hind legs in the water, but I'm not complaining about that jump at all. So then he started to move, and he started to walk, and we sort of anticipated which direction he was going in, and we positioned ourselves in a way that we were leading his way and he was walking behind us, so that we could get some phenomenal pictures. And this was one of my favorite pictures. You see the tiger, and on the ground next to his feet are these beautiful flowers of the flame of the forest tree. And to me, that tree and the tiger are both equally they're equally deserving of being called the flame of the forest. Got some fantastic pictures. I got to try some more of those low angle wide portraits, and we had a very nice morning with this tiger, mostly to ourselves. Towards the end of the sighting, a couple of other jeeps arrived, but it was a phenomenal high quality sighting. Now, I'll get my tiger stories out of the way before I move to other animals. So bear with me for yet another tiger story. This was a really interesting sighting. So if you remember in the beginning, I showed you that T120, Tiger 120 had been in a fight. And this picture was taken 2 days after that fight. So T120 had been in a fight with this tiger called T101. And the fight had been over the tigress Arrowhead. So both the males had fought over her. Arrowhead this was zone 2, which is adjoining zone 3, where the lakes are and where we had seen that unusual trio of tigers. So after that morning, Arrowhead, obviously, because she found the male that she was courting, T120, go and hang out with her daughter Riddhi. Arrowhead just left zone 3, also because she didn't want to get into conflict with Riddhi. And she came to zone 2, which is where she's mostly being found these days. And zone 2 has a dominant male tiger called T101. 101 is also again a young male in his prime, and we found him early one afternoon, in really unusual conditions. You might recollect that I mentioned a while ago that tigers heat up really quickly, and they are not great at tolerating heat. They need to rest in the middle of the day. They need to cool off. They need to drink lots of water. They like to lie in the shade close to water, or ideally in the water, to be able to fend off the heat. But when we found this tiger, he was sleeping right out there in the midday sun, and mid-afternoon sun, and it must have been well over 110 Fahrenheit at that time, closer to 115, because I think the highest temperature that we had recorded while we were there was 115 in the shade. So to see this tiger looking visibly distressed, sleeping out in the sun, not really being able to sleep, but just resting and absolutely exhausted from the heat, but still, for some strange reason, unwilling to get up and go to the shade or go find water. He kept restlessly sitting up and going back, behind this tree here for a little bit of shade, and then he'd quickly come back to where he was lying down. And while of course that gave us some great opportunities to get some good pictures of him, it was intriguing as to why he put himself through such suffering. The answer was beyond the angle of view of our camera lenses. So where this tiger was lying down was next to an old step well that was not really visible from the road. Now, a step well is, a kind of well which has steps leading into it. So instead of dropping a bucket with a rope attached to it and pulling it over a pulley, you actually walk down into the well and to where the water is and fill up your bucket. Of course, this was an abandoned old step well, so most of it must have filled up, and the water level must have been pretty high. So what we found out was, in this step well that was next to this tiger, next to where this tiger was lying, was Arrowhead. She never appeared while we were there, but we learned from a filming team that had been out all day that Arrowhead, was being pursued by 101, and she probably did not want to mate with him, and she, in her attempts to escape the male, she got into the well, and she found herself a nice spot, a cool spot with water in the shade, and she just fell asleep there. But the male refused to leave. He just blocked the way out of the well and just stayed there all through the day without a sip of water, without finding any shade, because he knew the moment he'd leave that position, even for a few seconds, Arrowhead would just get out and leave. So that was quite interesting. This was Arrowhead the next morning. If you look closely in the background, you can see a sambar deer looking at her. And that's 101 on the last trip, fortunately without Arrowhead, and fortunately in the shade. Now, enough of tigers. Let's talk about one of the other interesting creatures that we get to see on some of these trips. I often joke with my guests that for every 20 tigers that we see a leopard, and probably for every 3 or 4 leopards that we see, we might see a sloth bear. Now, sloth bear sightings are not as reliable or as common as tiger sightings are, and this sighting was from a very interesting afternoon we had on the first game drive of the last trip of the season, which was in the month of May. And that afternoon we were in zone 1, and we happened to be the only jeep in the zone. There were no other jeeps in the zone. And as we drove around, there was very little big cat activity. There were no tiger tracks, no pug marks, no alarm calls, and it was really hot. And as we drove around, we came across this female sloth bear. And usually sloth bears are shy and they don't stay for too long, and they're likely to run away. But perhaps because we were the only jeep and we were really quite well behaved, like we always are, she decided to stay on and gave us a phenomenal 45-minute long sighting, where she put up quite a good show for us. She sat up, she scratched herself, she foraged in the leaf litter and among the stones, looking for roots and fruit and termites and other insects. Now, before I continue with the story, let me show you some interesting things about the sloth bear really quickly. Now, notice that protruding lip that the sloth bear has. That lip is designed for sucking termites out of termite mounds. Sloth bears love to feed on termites, and termites sort of form a very significant proportion of their diet. They're also great at raiding beehives for honey. And if you notice, their nostrils are designed to be able to shut and protect the nose from termites and bees. And as I was mentioning, the lower lip is protruding to help turn it into a really effective straw. And despite the heat, the sloth bear is a really shaggy creature because it needs to protect itself from termites and honeybees. And if you notice, the claws of the sloth bear are huge. Some old naturalists found them very similar to the claws of the sloth, which is found in South America, which is why the bear was named after the sloth. It has, the name sloth bear has absolutely no, should not be used as any indication of the activity levels of this animal. This animal can be really, really active and really, really quick, and it's considered one of the most dangerous animals to encounter on foot while out in the jungle. So we got some really nice pictures of this sloth bear. She was behaving, almost as confident and as bold as a tiger would around us, and we had a treat. And then we decided to drive off. After the sloth bear left us, we decided to drive off and explore the rest of the park. We found, much to our dismay, that because we had been preoccupied with the sloth bear, we actually missed out on a leopard that had left fresh pug marks for us about a couple of kilometers from where we were watching the sloth bear. But that's the way of the jungle. You can't have everything. So as we explored the rest of the zone and it was time for us to head back, we passed this area again. And can anybody guess what the sloth bear is doing here? She's not yawning, and she's definitely not calling either. That's just an expression of relief as she scratched her butt on a fallen tree trunk. Anyhow, come back to my story. As we headed back and as we passed this area where we had seen the sloth bear, we found two more sloth bears. This time it was a mother with a cub. And this mother bear seemed a lot more wary of our presence than the sloth bear who was in that exact same spot a little while earlier. The cub gave us a really nice sighting. It even climbed up a tree. Although I do not have pictures of it climbing down the tree, I can tell you with assurance that the climb down wasn't as elegant as the climb up. So this season we had, some phenomenal tiger sightings, of course, but one of the best sloth bear sightings I've ever had. Never had such long and quality time with sloth bears in, in almost the entire length of the game drive. That was one fantastic game drive. And here are some of the other animals. Of course, among the big three of Ranthambhore, the tiger, sloth bear, and leopard, we also saw leopard. In fact, I had a really interesting leopard sighting one night when, after dinner, I had to go out on an errand, and coming back to the lodge around 9:30 or 10 p.m., there was actually a leopard in my headlights. And of course, I wasn't carrying my camera then, so I could not get any pictures. But we did see leopards in the park as well. We had two other leopard sightings. I do not have pictures of those sightings, but I did manage a short video clip, which I'll show you at the end of the presentation. Here is a spotted deer, one of the most common ungulates found in India's forests, and one of the key prey species for tigers. That's a big wild boar. Sambar deer, which are the largest deer that we find in India, spend a lot of their time in the summer in the water feeding on aquatic plants. In fact, it not only provides them with excellent nutrition, it keeps them cool, and the sambar also love to wallow in mud and water, which sort of acts as sunscreen and protects them from insects. But when sambar are in the water like this, they are very, very vulnerable to tiger attacks. And one of our jeeps, unfortunately, I wasn't in that jeep that afternoon. One of our jeeps had a phenomenal sighting of a tiger actually chasing down sambar in the water. That was one brilliant sighting. You must have seen some of those sequences on, a few of the BBC films and National Geographic films that feature Ranthambhore, because some tigers have specialized the art of hunting sambar deer down in the water. And Tiger 120, who we talked about earlier, is one of those tigers. He has also perfected that art. And one of our jeeps saw that tiger hunting sambar in the water on our last trip to Ranthambhore. This was another herd of sambar deer that was having a much needed afternoon drink when a spotted deer from far away gave a single alarm call. But you can see how jittery the deer are and how vulnerable they are around water in these late afternoons. That single alarm call caused all these deer to just panic and scatter. The heat is getting to everyone. It got to us. It was getting to the animals. And these langur monkeys here are next to another step well, a very beautiful and well-preserved monument, an ancient step well. And it's surrounded by banyan trees, and it's got water and shade. So lovely place for langur monkeys to hang out, and lovely backdrop for us to photograph them against. And this here is a blue bull, also called a nilgai, which is the largest Asian antelope. Its Latin name is Bosilaphus tragocamelus, which means the cow with a hump like a camel and a mane like a horse, which is an interesting way to describe the animal because it is neither of those three species. It's an antelope, and it's not a cow or a horse or a camel. So with that, I would like to show you a short clip, a sort of a rough cut of clips I managed to collect on 2 India Tiger Quest expeditions in the months of April and May, in the midst of photography. All of this was handheld with a DSLR camera, which isn't the best video camera, but I hope you'll enjoy it. This was the first stop there. See how it's foraging, see how it's rolling stones over to look for anything to eat. A short 5-minute clip, and then we can go into the Q&A. That's the saltbed looking for termites in a dead tree. See how big those claws are. That's the top. That's one of the leopards we saw. Nice male leopard. And that bird is called the king vulture. Stunning looking bird. That's the captivated.
गाड़ी में चलाना
Samba there, female. You see that in the summer they look very mangy. It's not mange, it's just like they're molting and they're shedding their coat.
एक मिनट जरा रुक जाओ
Magnificent beast.
This is when Tiger 120.
The tigress has gotten up to the young tigress Riddhi.
Where Riddhi was lying. And this is when it was to get together. That's Riddhi. She's a young tiger, she's never had cubs, and she and 120 mate. Hopefully that will be what they
She's yawning. Yeah, she'll move. She's yawning, then she'll lick her feet.
And arrow the other side. Yeah. Now it is moving. She's stretching and moving.
See the tigress is moving. She's coming towards the male. There's going to be some nice shots that you'll get now.
Oh wow, beautiful.
See, she's being playful and
lying down.
This was P58. He's a beast, isn't he? And that's it. So before we start the Q&A session, in case you are interested in any of our India trips, be it the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, India Tiger Quest, or Snow Leopard Expedition, or the Photo Pro trips, please find the contact information below at the end of this slide, at the bottom of this slide, and get in touch. And Nat Hab will be delighted to tell you more about these trips.
Are you ready for questions?
I am.
All right, we got lots of questions coming already. First of all, thank you. That was fabulous. You did it again. Absolutely. With all of our appetites to come see you in India and check out those tigers. So lots of questions about the naming of the tigers. It sounds as though the female tigers have names, the male tigers have numbers. Can you explain how they're named, how they're identified, that kind of?
They all have numbers, and there's absolutely no discrimination between naming or numbering animals of either sex, but it just happens, it so happens that, some tigers are just referred to by their number because there are so many, and all of them have been given a code by the park management, the forest department. They maintain a database of tiger pictures using which they identify these animals from their individual stripe patterns, and each tiger that has been identified that way is given a code. So every tiger has a 2 or 3 digit code, or sometimes a single digit code. The names are given by the guides and drivers and naturalists and tourists. So some animals just have names that stick on. Some animals are given multiple names by different people, so people just prefer to refer to them by their numbers because it's more accurate. So yeah, that's how it's done.
That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. Also, lots of questions about the low angle shots. Do you get those while still in the Jeep, or how do you do that? Do you get out of the Jeep to get those?
No, there's absolutely, it's absolutely not permitted to get out of the Jeeps. So the way we do that is to get below the seat onto the floor of the Jeep and, get as low as possible and get low angle shots. Also, if you're seated in the front of the Jeep, that naturally gives you an advantage. So you get much lower than you can in the back of the Jeep. But the great thing about our trips, Nat Hab trips on the India Tiger Quest expedition, is that we have no more than 2 guests per Jeep. So they have plenty of room to move around within the Jeep and try different positions and experiment with their shots.
Great. Questions about how many safaris did you lead this year to get all of these images and have all these experiences?
So the images that you saw on this webinar, on tonight's webinar, are a fraction of the images that I managed to photograph on just 2 India Tiger Quest expeditions. So each expedition is, there are 7 game drives in each expedition. So this is a fraction of the images and videos I managed to get from 14 game drives.
You really captured some incredible photos, and that video clip was amazing.
Thank you.
So let's see, I think we have time for a couple more. How many Jeeps are permitted in one zone at a time?
So that varies from park to park. It varies, of course, on the individual zone. So as per the size of the zone, they have a formula which decides how many Jeeps can be permitted. So it's usually about 20 to 25 Jeeps per zone, which is the perfect sort of number to space them out as nicely as possible, yet have enough people being able to go in.
And then do the Jeeps communicate with each other about where the tigers are?
They communicate, but not with radios. That's not permitted. Every time a Jeep passes another, they exchange information. So that's the limit of a communication.
Excellent. Let me just see if there's any other questions down here below. Is there any time to go when it is not hot?
Well, I'll answer that in 2 parts. Yes, there is a time to go when it is not hot, and that is on another itinerary called the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, which is also a tiger expedition, but a longer expedition that visits 3 national parks and that operates in winter. So a Grand India Wildlife Adventure operates from November through March, and it gets really, really cold in that trip. Most mornings when we are out on game drive, we are dressed in 3 layers of warms. So that's part 1 of the question. And part 2 of my answer is that even on the India Tiger Quest trip, when it gets really, really hot, the hottest part of the day is when we are indoors. So it's not as if we expose ourselves to extreme heat unnecessarily. The mornings are still very pleasant. When we go out in the afternoon, it's really hot in the first half hour or so, but we have plenty of electrolytes, we have plenty of lemonade, we have plenty of those neck collars, those neck cooling collars that we give our guests that work really well. And if it gets really, really hot, we just choose to leave a little later in the afternoon. So instead of 3 o'clock or 3:30, we might decide to leave at 4 o'clock when it's gotten a little cooler. And it doesn't really bother us, because for the hottest part of the day, we are indoors in air conditioning and really, really well looked after.
Well, thank you again. That was fabulous. I'll turn it back to you for any closing comments.
Thank you, Sunny. I hope everyone enjoyed this webinar, and I hope there are suggestions for other webinar topics that you'd like me to present on. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon with another Daily Dose of Nature webinar. Thank you.
I also want to thank everyone who tuned in. Please join us again on Monday for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineups, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a great weekend, everyone.